those of you that weren't at the session this morning or haven't met, I'm Karen Boston. I'm actually here on behalf of NACADA, which is the National Academic Advising Association, but my day job is I'm Assistant Dean of the Business School at the University of Arkansas. So if you heard me say Go Hogs earlier, Go Hogs, sorry. You know, we are a little bit of a competitor with Louisiana. But anyway, enough about that. But I want to talk a little bit about advising and the concept of beyond course scheduling, because we talked a little bit about this morning in Jane's opening presentation. Were all of you there for that? For the most? Okay. In Jane's presentation this morning about what academic advising is, and that's something sort of we want to talk through while we're here the next couple of days about what that is for you all, what that means, what it isn't, and all that that entails. So I'm going to talk a lot about just some overall things that I want you all to start thinking about in these sessions that I'm doing for the beyond course scheduling. And then tomorrow there'll be an opportunity to sort of do some hands-on, you give feedback, some brainstorming, some of those types of things that we want you all to think about so that you can start to develop that concept here on your campus collaboratively as an institution. So the first thing that I always like to say is that really if you're thinking about academic advising, you're thinking about kind of a dirty word, and let's see if the clicker works. Nope. Assessment. And I put it in that context because people think of that as a bad word lots of times. That really, in order to know what you're doing about academic advising on your campuses, at some point you're going to have to think about that concept of assessment. Is advising working? All right, and we're going to talk through that. Is what you're doing the purpose of academic advising, what you expect your students to know, do, value, or appreciate as a result of participating in the academic advising program? And so Jane talked a little bit about this morning about teaching. Advising is teaching. How many of you all buy into that concept? Good. Some of you all are haphazard about it. But what I like to pose as a question to people about when we talk about advising as teaching is do you want students to learn something from the experience of academic advising? Do you? Absolutely. All right. So then you're teaching them something. All right. And the other thing I like to point out is advising is not something you do to students. All right. It's not a verb. You don't do it to them. It's something that they participate in, that you provide a resource for. There's a whole lot of associated words that we will, and terminology that we use, but it's not something you do to students. It's something that you might do collaboratively with students and working with students, and so we want to talk through a little bit about that to get you going. So there's a lot of this information that we're going to talk through. Again, we're going to try to implement some of these things and have you work through it tomorrow, and I hope you'll come back to that session, which is defining and developing the role of academic advising on your campus. I think that would, and it'll talk more about the best practices and how you can create sort of this cohesive understanding of what advising is. So we're going to really go quickly through this because we only have about 45 minutes to do it, but the why and what of academic advising, a little bit about the assessment cycle so you can understand the overall picture of why we think about that, who should be involved in that, this advising is teaching concept, what learning outcomes that you want and where they come from. So what do you want students to learn from the advising process? So that outcome, we're going to talk through that a little bit. Measurements, how you act on those results, and assessment is research. Welcome. So it'll be a quick and dirty little overview. So first, I want you to think about these questions. We asked you this morning, and I have a slide about what you all said. But why is there advising here? Why do y'all do advising? And be honest. Yes?
A lot of our students, well, I'd say they count us. The majority of our students kind of just slipped out of high school. So they come to college, and it's like, well, I went to class in high school and I got a high school diploma. I might be able to do the same thing in college, and a lot of them don't realize that here you're going to have to actually open the book. You might have slipped out of high school, but you might have slipped out of college.
Okay.
And one of the big things is that a lot of them don't even, when I say a lot of them come in completely green, there are some that walk in the door thinking that all I have to do, let's say they're a nursing major, all I have to do is pass these classes with a C or better, and I'm
And I'm
automatically
out.
go right on through clinicals and I'm out. And they don't realize that they're even in a competition.
Okay. So if I pose to you the question about why do you have academic advising, what do you tell them then?
You have to inform them that they are in a competition. You have to let them know that they have to stay on track, and a lot of them don't even realize how much time is required just to study for a course.
Okay.
They may have studied 2 hours a week and got out of high school. 2 hours a week is not going to get them out of college.
Okay. What else? Why else is there advising on your campus?
You have to have them assume accountability for their direction and their choices, because, like Danny said, they need to commit fully to what they've selected to do, or be informed that, you know, this may not be the right choice for you. If you hated midterm and you couldn't get out of it the first or second time with better than a C, you don't belong in this applicant pool with students who took it one time and made an A the first time. But here you are making good grades in some of these liberal art courses. We might need to reassess your direction and your strengths, because regardless of what their mama told them, not everybody can be a nurse. Not everybody can be, you know, they do have different strengths and aptitudes that need to be considered, and sometimes the role of the advisor is to redirect.
Right?
Exactly.
That's very important. How many of you do redirect? Good. Okay. Other reasons why advising exists on your campus. And I'm going to go back to something.
What is this to steer them and see where they are in their actual programs? I know, like in our area in cyber, they could be working on this, but there's multiple certificates that can be awarded also that they don't have any idea about, because they just know, hey, I'm here for this associate's degree. They don't know
The other opportunities that are available to them.
Where their opportunities.
Good.
And if you do a really good job with providing them the right information about their direction and their timeline, then they can get into the system and put their classes in the next couple of semesters, and then come back and check with you right before they're ready to apply to clinicals. You know, if you do a good job up front of mapping it out and showing them what prerequisites have to go in what sequence, then the students can take more accountability for their own direction.
Right. You're teaching them something. So you're teaching them about, if we go back to that, teaching them that if I don't do X, Y, and Z, I won't get into this program. Or if I like these courses, I might be more interested in that program. And some of those things so that they can make those decisions on their own, right? Anything else? Any other reasons why you think we have advising on this campus? Why do you think we have advising on this campus? You.
To me, it seems like a way to get more students. More advising, they seem to like to have their hand held, be taken care of and shown.
Okay, so retaining the students.
Right.
Okay, good. And why then, this kind of is a similar question, but why do you as academic advisors engage them in the activities that you do? Whether that's help walk them through alternatives, help them understand consequences of grades, career center, those types of things. What would your response to that be? Success. Completers. And all of those things are very important, right? Because what does that mean? Money, resources, okay? So that's very, very important. So the why, if you think about, and as we talk through in the next couple of days, what really the purpose of advising is, I want you all to think about that. And I'm not sure that that's something that is uniform across this institution, that we're on the same page, and you are not unique. So what it is sort of talking about getting to y'all maybe to at least some common elements of what advising is, so that all students have that same experience to be successful here on your campus. So let's talk about the words that you used this morning. These are the words that were thrown out when Jane asked the question, what is advising? Here, the purpose of it for planning, guiding, teaching, career counseling. And those are very, very much assimilated with academic advising. But are there other words that for those of you that may, think that advising is just course scheduling? Because certainly advising is course scheduling. I mean, there's an element of that that means that you actually help them develop a course schedule, right? So but it's not in and of itself what it is. So we want to kind of talk through what that would be. And this is really obnoxious on my back, so my apologies if it looks weird. But there's really nowhere to put it, this microphone. So anyway, I also want you to think about the what of academic advising. So programmatically, what does the advising program here need to be successful to support all students? Again, going back to what I said earlier about so that all students have the same experience, whether they're business or education or nursing, that they all can be successful. And also I want you to think about individually, what do you as advisors need to help them to be successful? All right, so how many of you feel as advisors that you have adequate professional development and training to be a good advisor? Okay, and how many of you feel like you probably need some more of that to do so? Okay, and that's fair. So when you're thinking about what advising is and what it's not on your campus, it's important to think that. So we're going back to this assessment piece, and I bring it back, and I promise that you'll see the purpose of this. But really, if you don't have a foundation for what academic advising is, and be able to justify what it is, understand what it is, communicate what it is to your constituents, then you can't really know that what you're doing is doing a good job. All right, so it all ultimately will come back to assessing that. And so why do we do it? Well, we do it for program effectiveness, again, to see that what you're doing is working. There is program improvement so that you can take what you're doing and seeing if there are other ways to do it better or things that you're not doing and determine other ways to do it better. Certainly accountability, and this is sort of the scary word that people think that it's more about me as an individual advisor is not doing a good job, and that's what assessment is, and that's not necessarily what it is. That's a piece of that, but that's more evaluation of an individual versus the actual assessment. Certainly want to enhance student success, persistence, retention, and what are those activities that are aimed at student success that advising is part of, and we've talked through some of those already, and we're going to continue to do so. So let me just give you a couple of definitions about what assessment is. And this one I like one of the most is because really a lack of the data drives random, arbitrary decisions on campuses, whether it's advising or anything else. But so that's why that piece becomes important, so that as you begin to develop your advising program and you begin the elements of assessing it, that there is data to back up what you're doing, all right? Because the worst thing you can do is do nothing and then have others determine what needs to be done just arbitrarily. So, you know, I don't necessarily want to ask the question, have you ever seen that on this campus or others? But I guarantee that many decisions that are happening on different campuses, particularly with regard to advising and other things, are just done willy-nilly. You know, even on my campus, definitely they do just throw something up on the wall and see if it sticks and move on. But they're misdirected because they're not actually being assessed accurately. Going back to the advising and the learning, that the assessment is a systematic collection of reviewing and looking at what's happening and making sure that students are learning something. So that really, based on their experience in academic advising, that the students are learning something from that experience. And sometimes that's really hard to do, to ensure that the student is learning something from the advising experience and not from their roommate or something else. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to do that. One of the things that I want you to know about what assessment is not, and it's not just one time. Assessment, and when you're looking at your advising, is something that you do continually. So we're going to look at a chart here in a minute about the cycle of assessment, but it's not just one time you did this. It's not like a survey of satisfaction where you just put it on a shelf. It's something that you do continually. It's not just about measuring you as an individual advisor and your performance. It's, there are multiple levels of that measurement for those of you that do assessment in your other areas, and we'll talk through just a few of those. It's not about performance. I mentioned that earlier. It's not just about you as an individual advisor. Although evaluation of advisors, which again is different, that's the performance of an advisor, and typically is a performance evaluation that's done annually, can be a piece of the assessment. It's not just an administrative process, it's really a collaborative process with all of the constituents on campus, and sadly it's not easy or quick. It's typically challenging and a little bit hard, but certainly in the end worth it. So, going back to, for academic advising, assessment is the process for which we gather evidence about the claims we're making that advising is purposeful and intentional and doing what we want it to do on this campus. Okay, so going back to making sure that we can sort of validate what we're doing and it be supportive, and then seeing how we can improve it and do things on the campus. This is a chart about how to look at the relational piece of assessment, looking at your institutional vision and mission. How many of y'all are familiar with your institutional mission? All of you? Is it one of those things that they drill into you?
We had several meetings.
Okay. About it? Can anyone recite it? So that's been... So that would be a no? Okay. Well, ideally, your advising definition, mission that we'll get to here should be assimilated with your school, college, division mission, and ultimately your university institutional mission or vision. I prefer actually looking at this assessment cycle so that people get an understanding of the process. The middle there is really the sort of the meat of it all. The vision, mission, and goals and objectives for advising. What is advising on your campus? Okay? What do you want it to be? What's the definition of it? What is it currently? And what do you aspire it to be? That'll be more about the vision. And then the outcomes, the evidence, and interpreting that evidence and making changes based on that evidence and continuing to do so. See, that's that ongoing, not just episodic piece of assessment. So before you ever get to that, well, let me just also say that before you ever get to that, you have got to define what advising is on your campus collectively. And do you all know that you do have a mission statement related to advising? I'm shaking some yeses and some nos. Okay, so you do that, and I'm gonna show you what that is here in just a minute. But in order to get to that, again, we're gonna have to go back to what your purpose of advising is and who are the stakeholders in that, which in my opinion is really all of you in some form or fashion. Then defining the values, vision, mission, goals, and objectives associated with it. The outcomes, what do you want students to know, do, value, and appreciate as a result of the advising process. How you're going to do it, when they're going to do it. We talked this morning a little bit about Jane and her plants and the house plants, that they're not all treated the same, that if you water them all the same day every week, that it doesn't work. So it's a little bit about that too, that your freshmen have the ability to do different things than maybe your sophomores or your students with 15 hours versus 30 versus 45 or whatever it might be. So we'll talk about that and then how you can act upon those results. This is another way of looking at the assessment chart. without getting into too much detail. And then this is a longitudinal version of doing it, where you can take your mission, you can do your outcomes related to that, your objectives, when you want it to occur, what percentage of students you want it to be impacted by, and then the results that you intend to do based on it. So let's talk a little bit, because I've talked enough right now. Who are your stakeholders in this process that you would consider here at BIPC? I'm trying to get that. Who are the stakeholders in deciding what academic advising is?
Well, we have an academic advising center, don't we? I mean,
But they have to answer to, in order to get anything done, you still have to go through administration, the chancellor.
Students as well.
Well, let me ask you this. So you have a council, and we met with them at lunch. And those are members of not only the professional advisors in the advising center, but my understanding is also there are faculty involved in that. And there are also student affairs personnel on that group. Is that correct? So when they develop initiatives for advising, or let's say when they develop the mission statement or the advising syllabus, who does that go to? You're saying that it has to go through an administrative review of sorts before it's official. So is that something I earlier asked about, whether you all knew that there was an mission statement for advising on your campus, and some of you said no and some of you said yes.
Depends on what committee they were
So what do you mean by that?
on. Our mission statements and all, we've just gone through revamping and going through it, and we were divided into different ways.
So whether it was the university's mission or whether it was the advising mission, or were any of you all involved in the advising mission?
We did a little bit. There were subcommittees that did a little bit of everything. And then,
Okay.
And then I think the advisors, along with Peggy and Allison and some other people, did the finalizing of that, along
Okay.
with the chancellor and Karen Riccio.
Okay. So do you all feel as though those people on the advising council represent the common stakeholders in this process?
I would say there'd be a bunch of them.
They should.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Do they have students on there? We had student as a, is there a student on the council?
I think so.
In most committee
Yeah, we
instances,
have-
there are members of the
Of
Student
the-
Government
Right.
Association that
Student
are
government, I think
appointed
there's
as
one on
Okay.
there.
committee members.
Okay, good. That's good. But it's something, and tomorrow when we do more of the practical piece, it's something to think about. Who should be involved in this process of deciding what academic advising is on your campuses? Okay? We're going to talk a little bit about values, vision, and mission. So one of the things that I think is important is that we can talk about, and I'm just going to touch on values, vision, and mission, but ideally you would just at least have a mission about what academic advising is, and y'all seem to have that now with a few objectives related to that. But things that you need to think about as you work through this process is a value is what you consider to be important regarding academic advising. And so if you are not familiar, NACADA has the core values. And I don't know if you can see it very well here, but it says advisors are responsible for themselves and their professional practices, to their educational community, for involving others. And the idea being that you can take some of these concepts as you developed and create what your value for academic advising is. Here's just one example. Academic advising at, you could say BIPC reflects the institution's commitment to student learning, persistence, and success by you could have multiple, just a few, but the idea is that what are those things that you value as a part of academic advising on this campus? And then you're looking at the vision, and the vision, of course, is more aspirational in nature. And the vision is typically short, sweet, but something related to where you're going to get. So many of you are familiar with that. But things to consider is that it represents the future state, that it's inspirational, that it is ambitious. So, you might not say we want to be #1 among all Louisiana community colleges by 2015 in X, because that might not be very realistic, although ambitious. Maybe not be realistic, but that's how we look at it that way. Generates enthusiasm and a commitment to a long-term direction of success. So here's an example of a vision to develop a coordinated and responsive academic advising program that has regional and national recognition. That's a realistic vision statement, right? Wouldn't you say? So when you're thinking about where you are now with regard to advising, but maybe where you want to be. And again, I'm going to focus more on the mission, because going back to what I had talked about before, that's really sort of the core centerpiece, the meat of, and when I attempt to explain it to people, it's more about, what do you think academic advising is? What is your definition of academic advising on this campus? Now you can just say that now, and then you can get, when you have that sort of the foundation of that, then you can begin to have, your vision and do some other things. But at minimum, you should be thinking about that mission. And for those of you that haven't seen it, I'm going to pull up what your mission for academic advising apparently is now. So going back again, they reflect the purpose of academic advising on your campus. Some institutions do have, like I showed you before, an institutional one, but also maybe a departmental, college level, however you all want to do it. It is much more of a challenge to get an institutional one. It's easier to get more of a departmental one that 10 people agree on versus 100. So you can certainly look at it in that respect. And there are several resources, again, with NACADA that you should consider, and the CAS standards that you should consider as you develop whatever that mission statement is. And part of that reason is so that when you are developing this and you are bringing it to your administrators and your constituents, that they recognize that that mission statement is based on something. It's not just something that you all sat around in a circle and decided was going to be the mission statement. That it's based on national standards related to academic advising, whether it be NACADA or the CAS standards that actually have advising associated standards. So that when you are communicating it and when you are trying to sell it to certain individuals, that it is vested in something, that it is based on some national standards. So it's always important to consider taking that information from the concept of core values, the CAS standards, and otherwise. So I've seen many institutions that have just, again, in a period of 30 minutes sat around and said, yeah, that sounds good, let's write that down. And it's not based on anything. It's just kind of something they thought sounded good. So I would encourage you all to consider that. And I'm not sure if you have or haven't so far when you have done your current one. So again, the mission statement should basically state what you value and believe academic advising is. And the second part of that is, do people even know it? And we sort of have this half and half in here. Some people know it, some people don't, on what your mission statement is. So this is the one that you all have on your advising syllabus. How many of you have seen this? Okay. How many of you, it's the first time you've seen it? Okay. So we kind of almost have about half and half in this room. So given what I have told you so far about mission statements, and what your beliefs have been, and what some of the things that you've shouted out about earlier today and a few minutes ago about what your values and your beliefs are with regard to academic advising, do you think that this is sufficient for BITC?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. For the community that
Yes.
we're
That
in.
we're,
Yes.
students
Because
that we
this was
serve.
developed by participants in this community.
It was developed by enough stakeholders that were representative and represents what you all think advising should be. And do you think it's clearly articulated to your institution, your staff, your faculty, your administrators? How about your students? Where do students learn about this?
You mean the mission statement itself?
Yes. Where do they see it?
If they go to the advising, if they go to the advising page on the website, or when they go visit the advising center,
They get this?
they can see that.
Okay. Do they get it on paper or something like that when they
It's on
leave,
paper,
or?
but they are developing a pamphlet, are y'all
There's
feeling
a
that?
syllabus and
That's
advice
coming out,
statement
but that
and
hasn't been
brochure.
approved.
Okay,
Waiting on some stuff.
great. Good. How about other constituents, say donors, or,
They'll have to ask, does BIPSI have a mission statement for advising, and then we'd say yes. But is it a blanket thing that's mailed out to everyone?
no. And I wouldn't expect it to be. I'm just trying to pose the question of, making sure that multiple constituents know. You actually have a pretty good traditional student age group. So do your parents of those students know that advising might not be like it was when they were in school, if they were? Whether they are familiar with, again, what advising is and maybe what it's not. So those are just some things to think about as y'all have crafted this and communicate it and utilize it maybe in some training or workshops or other things with regard to academic advising. That's another example of a mission statement. Certainly a trend, so to speak, is people utilizing that teaching and learning concept within their mission statement and trying to explain to students and other constituents that we want them to learn something from the advising process. So, something to think about is that your mission or your definition shouldn't necessarily have a really long shelf life, but a shelf life, and thinking about other ways to enhance it or improve it in the future. That it just isn't a one-time, that's done. We don't have to think about our mission again. It's also important to think about the goals associated with your advising mission statement or your definition of what academic advising is. And because your mission is sort of overall, then you might think about what those other associated goals and program objectives might be. And they can be, again, institution specific, or they can get even more narrow and focused by department or division or college if you wanted to do that. But those should also relate back to those national standards, to whether it's NACADA, Concept of Academic Advising, CAS standards, those types of things. So I think right now you all have 2 of those. Are you familiar with what those are? I did not put them on a slide, but I can tell you what they are. They are partner with students to develop academic, career, and lifetime learning goals, and connect students with the learning community, including campus and community resources. Okay? How does that sound? Y'all are like, great, sounds perfect, wonderful. Let's put it on a t-shirt, right? But it's also something to think about. One of the recommendations I would give you all is to think about and we'll talk through some of that as we actually work on some of these a little bit more tomorrow. Thinking about them not being compound in nature. So your objectives should be, your career, them accessing the partner with students to develop academic, career, and lifetime learning goals. Well, your academic goals may be very different than the career goals. And in terms of measuring them and introducing them and those type of things you might want to define a little bit more clear. So there's a little bit about program goals. And then I mentioned CAS standards. Are y'all familiar with CAS standards? No? Okay. Well, CAS standards, Council for the Advancement, Standards in Higher Education, they have a number of programmatic goals that are associated with lots of different areas in higher education. Advising being one of them, financial aid, student affair type programming goals. And so this is where you can take those that are associated with academic advising and incorporate them into your mission, your objectives, etc. So just some examples of those that are related to academic advising. Assure that academic advisors collaborate in collection of relevant data about students for use in individual academic advising conferences. It's more of a professional developed one. Promote learning and development. They are really from the perspective of what advisors should be doing related to academic advising. So what those national standards should be related to academic advising. Now we're sort of running a bit out of time. So we've talked about this flow of the assessment cycle. Again, really focusing and narrowing down on your mission, possible vision if you want to be aspiration in nature, those associated goals and objectives. And they really drive that entire assessment cycle. So what you all will need to start thinking about is your student learning outcomes and your process delivery outcomes. So what are those things that you want students to know? Y'all talked a little bit about that this morning. Know is always the easiest one, but oftentimes one that you have this long laundry list of things you want students to know, right? You want to know about financial aid and maybe veterans benefits and the drop ad deadlines and where to do X, Y, and Z. You want them to know a lot of information. And what do you want them to do? Well, it's one thing if they know it, but if they don't do anything with it, it doesn't do much good. So what are those things that you want them to do? And, I'm sorry?
Look at articulation agreements so that they can make wise decisions about course offerings.
Good.
When things are going to be offered in spring only versus fall only.
Good. But that's something I want y'all to start thinking about, and we'll go through that exercise in those in the presentation tomorrow. And then what do you want them to value and appreciate? And that has often been the hardest one for people to think about. With regard to the advising process, well, ideally you want them to value and appreciate maybe the process of learning in general, the opportunity to go to college, to get higher education. You may also want them to value and appreciate your academic advisor and that experience that they've had with you or the advising program, so that they will come back and re-engage. Maybe you don't want them to come back, but ideally you do want them to come back and take advantage and participate in that academic advising experience. And then on the flip side, the process delivery outcomes that you would want to think about, well, if you want to know, value, do, value, and appreciate, if you want your students to do those things, well, what are those things that you individually as an advisor need to do? So if you need your students to know about financial aid deadlines, those types of things, well, you need your advisors or your advising programs to know those things. And how then are you going to infuse that? Are you going to do that through workshops, training, website, press release? What are those things? What do you want your advisors to do? Participate in opportunities like this? Go to conferences? Hold office hours? What are those types of things that you collectively as an institution may want your advisors to do? So again, going back, that everybody gets that same experience regardless of their major or who they see for advising. And then what do you want them to value and appreciate? Maybe the opportunity to engage with students, that type of thing. So those are what your outcomes are going to be, and that's how and that's what you're going to be ideally long-term measuring, to seeing if that as a result of students participating in academic advising, it's being impactful. Okay? We talked a little bit about mapping. I said earlier that your students with 15 versus 45 hours have very different experiences. So there may be this whole laundry list of things that you want them to know, but when do you want them to know it? When do you want to do this house plant versus this house plant? Okay? This house plant's a little older, maybe doesn't need as much water. This one was just planted, those types of things. So we'll kind of help you walk through that mapping process, and again, figuring out where you want to engage those elements, both for students and advisors. Do you do it at orientation? Do you do it at an advising appointment? You know, when are you going to have those experiences for mapping? And then last, obviously you would want to gather that information to see that as a result of this advising program, so to speak, that you are gathering the evidence to really not just be accountable, that's not what it's about, but to make improvements, to improve upon those things that are going well or maybe not going as well, and making sure that your students are actually learning something from that experience. And then doing something about it. All right, so I wanted to leave just a few minutes for questions. So we have about 4 minutes maybe for questions. I know that's a lot of information in a short setting, but the idea being that you all sort of get an overview of that advising is more than that course scheduling. But what is it? What do you think it is, and what do you think it isn't? And what do you want students to think it is and isn't? And then how you implement that on your campus. And when, and where, and what you do. Yes.
When I first came here, this was one of my first students that I advised at Gibson. I asked her what was her major. She said pre-med. And she was enrolled in my class, so I got to know her a little bit better first before I kind of crushed her little bubble. And I had to basically redirect her.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you didn't finish but 9 years of school. What makes you think you're going to do 10 or 12 years of college? So why don't we change your major to nursing? It's something that if you finish in 4 years, you can always get a decent paying job. And if you decide to go on to med school, you can. And she sat back and she listened and she did. As a matter of fact, when I first met her, she probably had 140 hours at a 2-year school. And it's like, it's time for you to leave. I can't afford a 4-year school, but I mean, I can understand why she was with this place, because this is probably the first place that she had come where she had been successful. And I said, well, have you ever thought about a minority scholarship? I'm not a minority. I said, you pull over to Grambling and look around. I promise you, you're a minority. So she went over there, got a minority scholarship, and finished in nursing, and now she's one of the head nurses at the VA hospital.
That's great.
She hadn't gone back to medical school, hadn't even thought about it, married with kids and everything, and it's doing wonderful.
And you had a big impact on that.
Right.
You did.
But one of the things that you always heard before coming here, one of the biggest complaints I always heard about BIPSI was over half of my classes didn't transfer, and I didn't understand it until I got here. And it was really because a lot of those students, this was the first place they had come where they were successful, and they almost refused to leave. So they have
That's a good problem to have.
140 hours at a 2-year school.
That's a good problem to have. That's retention, right?
60 of them.
That's retention. Any other questions or? No other questions? Well, I hope I got you thinking a little bit more about advising, even after lunch. But I hope I got you thinking about, so maybe hopefully y'all will come back to the session tomorrow and really generate some ideas about what you think advising should be on this campus and what you think it should not be. All right, and how to water all those plants differently. Okay, thank y'all for your time.